Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic webinar that we have ahead of us. I'm Fayon Dixon, and I'm here today bringing you another webinar from the Equal Engineers. So it's all about our Engineering Talent Awards. Now, we are an organisation who is focused on improving the diversity and inclusion of the engineering industry. And you can find out so much more about what we do on our website. So this is a series of webinars hosted by myself, Fayon Dixon, and my partner in crime, David Purgy. And it is our opportunity to speak to those people who have been nominated for an award at the Equal Engineering Talent Awards. Sadly, it couldn't go ahead because of COVID-19, but we will be rescheduling for the 9th of September. So glad rags can go on, the show will go on, and we'll meet there and we'll meet all those wonderful nominees. So we want you to take part today. There is a Q&A facility, so please do use it if you have a question. You can also use the Q&A facility should you have a technical question. Please don't direct it at me. We have Fraser, who is waiting in the wings, and anything you need, sound, quality, anything like that, he will be able to help you out. So just send him a message. And once all of our webinars are complete, they will be going on to the Equal Engineers website. So please do share them over and over and over, because we've got some wonderful people to speak with and who are just sharing their, not just their working life, but a lot about their own lives as well. So we're really, really grateful to them. So my guest today, I would say, is from the oldest professional engineering institution, and it's so fantastic to have the Director of Membership, Sean Harris, here. Hello, Sean, how are you doing?
Hey, hello, very well indeed, thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
So pleased to have you. And just generally, lockdown and working, how's it all going?
I think, like a lot of organisations, we transitioned fairly quickly. So we had planned, I think, to trial the remote working piece from about the 18th of March. And we were slightly overtaken by events because, of course, the government moved quite quickly, I think about the 20th or 21st. So we moved to remote working towards the end of March and have been remote working ever since. So it's working very effectively. There are some initial teething problems, I think. We had some equipment possibly in the wrong place, but actually remarkably quick to adjust, I think. And apart from the stresses and strains associated with remote working generally, not having contact with colleagues and friends and the like, I think most people have adjusted fairly quickly. And ICE and the line managers, the teams that look after their people. So if there are any issues, they've been fairly quickly ironed out, I think.
Fantastic. Well, tell us a little bit more about ICE. Give us an overview.
Other than us being the oldest and most venerable. I mean, it's a great claim to fame to have, clearly, because nobody can pip us on that one. It brings with it its own challenges, but it is the world's oldest professional engineering institution. We sort of formed up in 1818. As a result of that, we have some fairly impressive sort of luminaries, people that most people have heard of in terms of engineering. The Isambard Kingdom Brunels, the Joseph Bazalgettes, who was responsible for the London sewers, the Rennies, the Stevensons. So a very illustrious group of engineers that formed the history of ICE. It's withstood everything really from 1818 onwards. It's located about 100 metres from the Houses of Parliament, 50 metres from the Treasury. In fact, the Treasury building swapped buildings with ICE back in sort of the early part of the 1900s. It has 95,000 members in about 156 countries around the world. So it is by definition diverse, in as much as we have members in virtually every registered country on the planet. And the ability to knowledge share as a result, obviously, is very, very powerful, because whether you're a Hong Kong engineer, an American engineer, or working in Australia or Africa, or wherever it might be, the ability to share that information and knowledge, best practice, is obviously very, very useful. We're also a interesting in as much as some organizations accredit qualifications, some organizations are learned societies, and the IC, along with a lot of the British PEIs, are an accrediting body, a learned society, i.e. we provide knowledge, and we also professionally qualify people. And our main remit is to professionally qualify people and to share knowledge.
It sounds fantastic. So you are the director of membership. It sounds like a huge role. You must have so many people in the team working with you. Tell us about your role.
No, I'm very fortunate. You're quite right. It is an interesting part. So what I may have said under the What's IC All About is it has three primary functions. One is knowledge. One is creating policy for both insight and influence. And the other piece is the membership journey towards a qualification. So I'm responsible and work with an extraordinary team of people who engage with would-be engineers, potential engineers, from the time they're at school. So our first engagement is probably around the 11 years of age. We have about 3,500 STEM learning ambassadors, IC members, that go into schools and engage with young people. We then re-engage in slightly more detail between 16 to 18. We call it the sixth form program, or the highers in Scotland. But effectively, it's engaging with those young people just before they make their career choice, either apprenticeship or university. So it's the last opportunity we have to say, have you considered engineering? If so, have you considered civil engineering? And these are the benefits associated with that career. So we engage at that stage, and we then literally follow the individuals all the way throughout their career. So we have teams that engage them at university. We have teams that support the transition from student at university or at apprenticeship through to employment within a company. And we have teams again that engage with the companies to ensure that training, the experiential training, from the time somebody has an academic qualification up to the time they take a professional qualification with ICE, there are people there to provide that support throughout. And then, of course, when somebody qualifies, there are various grades of membership, but fundamentally either an engineering technician, an incorporated engineer, or a chartered engineer. From that time on, the institution also provides them the knowledge, the continuing professional development knowledge that allows them to remain current and competent for the rest of their careers. So it is a busy existence.
It's a wonderful support structure, and I think it's the going in early into schools that makes that difference. You know, planting that seed in a young person's life and letting them know that no matter what interest you have, you could turn that into an incredible career in engineering and actually help change the world. And you know, what kid of age 11, 12, even at primary age, doesn't want to hear that they can do something amazing? And through the work I do when I go into schools and doing different work with STEM topics, I've had the great opportunity to meet some of your guys. And they work in groups with young people, and the young people have got so many questions for them. So it's just wonderful that you are getting out there and playing such a huge part in their development all the way through. I love that. I really do.
Well, I have to say with ICE, I mean, we are one of 38 professional engineering institutions. So we are just one part of a much bigger machine. We all contribute people to STEM learning. So we have 3,500 of our ICE members that go into schools for that engagement piece. All the other PIs provide similar amounts of people, I'm sure, depending upon size. What is increasingly the case is that young people, rather than see a career in engineering as being an end in itself, as in it's a career for life or otherwise, increasingly it's what they're able to affect upon society through their choice of career. So as you rightly say, we don't go in and say, let us demonstrate how you would build a bridge. What we're trying to say to that young person is, by building a bridge, wherever it might be in the world, you are either connecting two communities together, otherwise wouldn't be joined, or the small part you play will have a significantly bigger impact upon society more generally. And that could be rail, it could be high-speed rail. I mean, it's a contentious issue, but if high-speed rail generates greater economy, greater life opportunities for people, building the railway has a significant outcome more than just building a railway. So quite often with young people, the question is, do you want to change the world? If the answer to that is yes, I want to change the world, civil engineering possibly will allow you to do that in a more obvious way than possibly other careers. And back to that space, the very place we are competing with to try and say to people, change the world, make the world a better place, transform society through civil engineering. Those very same people are being attracted by medicine, by pharmacy, by law, and a whole raft of other very, very credible and challenging occupations. So it's not easy, which is why we're so grateful for the thousands of IC members that are willing to give up their own time in order to engage with young people to try and sell that proposition.
Well, you've got those challenges of, like you say, the life-saving roles that are out there. And we know a lot of parents might push their children towards that, doctors, being a dentist or, architect or whatever. But the other challenges, of course, are achieving equality, diversity, and inclusion at the ICE. So what is it that you're doing to face those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, it is probably the most significant challenge we face, to be honest, Phil. One of the bonuses of being the oldest professional engineering institution is, as I say, we can't be pipped. It's venerable. We have a tremendous tradition and sense of purpose. But with that comes the issue that we created at a time where it was a different world. And very quickly, we're trying to inform and to promote a profession which perhaps traditionally wasn't ideally suited either in terms of gender for female engineers or indeed for the BAME community. So we invest quite significantly as an institution. And I make that point. I have a very, very special colleague called Andrew Stanley, who leads on most of the heavy lifting to do with equality, diversity, and inclusion. He, extraordinary individual, puts an enormous amount of effort in. But it's part of his job and it's part of my job. And there's no way between two people you can have the sort of effect on society that we would like. So we rely very, very heavily on mobilizing the membership. And I made mention of 95,000 members around the world. Those are the people who we can mobilize in order to bring about the changes that we seek. So we have certainly in the last 4 to 5 years put an enormous amount of effort into trying to redress the balance with, I like to think, some really encouraging results. So we have a whole raft of programs in terms of how we engage. Everything from making sure that every one of our members is aware that everybody carries unconscious bias within them. It's not a criticism of any individual. I think anybody from any background will carry with them their own sort of innate beliefs or feelings about things. So we've looked at unconscious bias training and we've run unconscious bias training for all the people who are involved in our professional reviews process. So anybody who's charged with deciding who is good enough, technically and competence-wise, to come into the institution has undergone conscious bias training. All our interview processes for staff within the institution of civil engineers are blind interviews. They're anonymized. The specific training in terms of support learning difficulties, so that somebody coming to the institution to be assessed by way of professional review, if they come and they are atypical of candidates that come forward, that there are people who are trained and aware within the institution to make allowances for those specific needs, so that we broaden the pool of people who eventually have access to the institution of civil engineers. It isn't one size fits all. This is what I suppose I'm saying.
So pleased to hear that. I have teenage stepdaughters. They are 16 and 18, and they are from this generation who we will hear about through decades, of the generation that never got to do their exams. Yeah. And, they're extremely opinionated. They're mixed race. They're extremely opinionated about opportunities for the BAME community. And, they cite situations where somebody with a name that just sounds like it might not be, an English or traditional name, or that sort of when you walk into a room and people are like, oh, I expected something else, you can read it in their face. As sure as you can see my colour, we can see your colour. So tell me, as a white male from a white man from a predominantly male institution, personally, what have you done to improve the situation of the EDI?
If I could just go back to one of the points you made there about the effect that it would have on somebody walking into an environment or room or an interview and being faced by an all-white male panel, for example. There's quite a lot of research on this, and it was something that was new to me. My background is not civil engineering, and it's not institution. I had a career before I joined this sector. And it's something that had never really occurred to me. It had never been an overt issue. And it was explained to me that a BAME member coming in for an interview and going into a room where the panel is, for sake of argument, 5 white individuals, the impact upon that individual is 15 to 20% less effective in an interview than if it was a mixed panel. Now, that might seem obvious to the BAME community. It's not obvious to a lot of people. So in terms of the practical side of what we do, there are blind interviews. The name thing doesn't crop up in terms of it's anonymized. So from an institutional perspective, the people that come to work for the institution, I mean, 57% of our employees in the institution of civil engineers are female, for a start, and 32% are from a BAME background. So way beyond the national norm in that respect. So in terms of, as an institution and as an employer, how do we fare? We can manage that fairly well. So it's anonymized, it's balanced panels, it's mixed panels, so that people aren't suddenly confronted with, you know, here we go again, an all-white male panel. I now have to up my game or adapt my natural way of presenting myself in order to try and adapt to this environment. More importantly than that, though, we are the home, if you like, of infrastructure. So we represent thousands of employers, and we represent almost 100,000 members who work for those employers. And getting that same sort of practice and best practice into those companies is more of a challenge. So I mentioned earlier on that Andrew Stanley does a manful task in terms of cutting about the place and carrying the EDI piece, and I support him as Director of Membership. He's absolutely our lead. But we are 2 people in an organisation. We rely very heavily on our FIR panels, our fairness, inclusion and respect panels, which are across the country in terms of in our regions and across the world, in fact. And we also rely upon our members of ICE who work for companies. And some of these companies have big departments for equality, diversity, and inclusion, significantly better resourced than ICE. So what are we doing for the profession? I hope what we're doing for the profession is we are collating data, we're doing trend analysis, we can map the growth of BAME engineers within the civil engineering profession, females, those with specific sexual orientation, those with disability or special learning needs. We can map all those, and we can inform the employers in terms of how things are improving or how things are not improving. And it's much easier sometimes to reinforce success and work out other ways of doing business which is less effective if we have that level of data. So we act more as a repository of data. We are able to do trend analysis and explain to employers how they might improve their performance. We can disseminate best practice. I mean, Equal Engineers are a tremendous organization for providing that best practice. There's a whole raft of training modules that they provide for us. So we propose and hopefully lead perhaps by best example rather than dictate or police the sector, because employers have significant more resource and real expertise within them to make sure that they're improving their own space as well.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's exactly what I would expect from your institution. But do you have any personal anecdotes yourself of how you've been able to kind of, you know, sort of change the look of things, you know, the way things are?
So I mentioned earlier, well, personally, as part of the team, we've engaged on a whole raft of different programs and projects. And one example would be, I mentioned that the 1 Great George Street is our headquarters in Westminster. In 2015 and 2016, it was nominated the world's #1 conference venue. So it's a very, very prestigious, very, very glamorous building, which is used for a whole raft of different activities, lots of political meetings, lots of influence meetings. And as I say, it's right at the heart of Westminster. So one of the programs that we ran was a BAME campaign, where as you walk into the foyer of 1 Great George Street, which is a sort of magnificent entrance with, you know, huge sort of empty space, you know, very sort of stunning area, all the supporting pillars within 1 Great George Street hosted effectively a banner of the BAME engineer. Now, I said we were a 200-year-old institution. A very valid criticism, because of our history, is of the 200 presidential portraits in 1 Great George Street, all of them are white. So in 200 years, all of them being white. It was so refreshing, and the feedback was so positive. For the first time within 1 Great George Street, the first impression you got of 1 Great George Street walking in was the fact that actually it was diverse. We had BAME engineers with their stories and hashtags, and those hashtags then fed into the website and an entire campaign about the sort of activities people are doing as engineers who happen to be BAME. So it wasn't promoting BAME and saying, and they happen to be an engineer. Engineers were out there transforming society and making the world a better place. And it just so happened that the 20 BAME engineers we approached, 100% of them said they wanted to be part of that campaign, and all of them engaged both in the campaign and in the photo montage within our foyer. So that's one example where, for the first time, within 1 Great George Street, we changed the dynamic. Instead of it being 200 white portraits going back 200 years, for the first time, really, we presented the diversity of ICE. And as an institution and as a profession, we actually, all institutions do extraordinary work and all are trying very hard to redress the balance. But I think as an institution, we are doing reasonably well in that space. In terms of our BAME engineer cohort is much greater than what one might expect from the national backdrop. So we are hopefully batting above our weight.
That's great to hear. Really, really refreshing. And it's so good that we are able to communicate, via the web. And, once you put a hashtag out there, people can attach to it and look more into what you're doing, because not everybody's going to be able to physically go down to the building and see. But I can just imagine what that would do to not even just a young person, but to a person of colour that might think this is somewhere that is not for me. So it is very refreshing to hear this. So we have mentioned females, we've mentioned LGBTQ plus. Let's just go into depth a little bit more about what you specifically do to attract them into your into the workplace, let's say.
Well, in terms of if we address the gender issue, are you happy to talk about? Well, if one of the great challenges used to be, are enough people doing the sciences that we require in order to convert them into engineers? And I have to say, great credit to STEM learning. In the space of 10 years, maths has gone from the least popular A-level subject to the most popular. About 10 or 11% of students now study maths A-level. So in terms of creating that pool of potential engineers, STEM learning and that sort of engagement through Engineering UK and the other PIs has been incredibly successful. And of course, in that pot of people who are eligible possibly to go on and do a degree or an apprenticeship, you do get females and male mix. So at that stage, in terms of maths students in the sciences, in 2016, I think the female population for the first time overtook the male in terms of medicine. There were more female undergraduates than male undergraduates studying medicine. Go back to the early 1900s and we were celebrating the first female doctor. I mean, there's been an extraordinary transition. So we're trying to reflect the same within engineering. And in order to engage directly with the female cohort, I mentioned earlier that we engage at the young school level. We also engage at the 16 to 18 level, and we send in role models. So we have female civil engineers and role models that will either put something online, do a blog or a webinar, or physically, visit the schools. Now that may change because of social distancing, the particular sort of disaster that's befallen us in terms of COVID. But in terms of putting people forward as role models, we have a whole raft of engineers from early 20s all the way through to our fellows, which is the highest grade we offer, who can demonstrate the success that females can have within the industry. Both in terms of females generically, we've seen fairly significant levels of improvement across all grades. So at the junior grade, which if you think there are something like 4,000 hairdressing apprenticeships in UK each year, there might only be 100 apprenticeships that females would normally be attracted to. We've seen fairly significant increases in that lower level, the junior level of engineering technicians. So in between 2015 and 2019, in that sort of 4-year period, we saw increase at that grade of membership for females by 12.5%. Now, one could argue it's starting from a low figure, but 12.5% increase is against that cohort is very, very impressive. So we're increasingly attractive to young female engineers coming in who realize that actually It's no longer all about carrying bricks on a building site or moving rubble. You know, it's design, it's finesse, and they bring a lot to the party. And I think historically, where the female workforce has been mobilized in order to reinforce society, generally speaking, females tended to be put into production work lines or something which involved manufacturing rather than construction. But there has been a shift, and although the percentages, the numbers of females working on building sites remains very low, the numbers of females entering the profession in terms of design and in terms of contracting is growing much faster rate than their male counterparts, which is a great place to be. In terms of specifically the BAME engagement, we try to do intelligent targeting. So if we know, for example, that young black males or females come from a specific area of London or the Midlands where they're a group, that's where we target. So we have a very good relationship with London South Bank University, University of East London, Queen Mary's, Coventry, and areas like that, where we will go in specifically to the schools in that area in order to encourage them to take engineering as a profession. And generally speaking, those cohorts tend to study at local universities near to their own communities rather than flogging across the other side of the country. That isn't a one size fits all. There are numbers. I mean, the black males outperform their white male counterparts considerably at A-level. And yet the vast majority of black males who choose to do engineering choose not to go to Russell Group universities. They'd much rather go to a university which is local to their area, where they're more comfortable, their friends and family are based, and do it that way. So knowing that, we target the sixth form and the schools that feed those universities at a local level. We also work with other organisations. So in terms of attracting females to the profession, the market leaders, I would argue, would be WISE, SEMTA to a certain extent, but certainly, you know, Women in Science and Engineering. So rather than try and replicate what they do, we collaborate with them. And we produced a toolkit, an apprenticeship toolkit for employers, so that if they thought we want to attract young female engineers into our profession, we want to be the employer, they had a toolkit of options available to them to try and attract them. And we published that with WISE and SEMTA, the apprenticeship toolkit, very successful. And that's seen an increase in young females coming forward to join the engineering profession through the apprenticeship route. Trying to think as we go on, there's a whole raft of, we work with the Association for Black Engineers. There's a whole raft of activity we do where we mobilise the expertise and the power of other organisations which are aligned to our outcomes. So if there are big organisations out there who are engaging in this space, we are more likely to collaborate with them than to try and replicate it. So as a sort of throwaway fit, there's about 3,500 organisations engaged in education and inspiration. 3,500 trying to encourage people to do some form of STEM type career. It would be ridiculous for us to just continually replicate what they're doing. It's much better to go in through one particular route. So we choose STEM learning. It's the same if we want to engage with young women in engineering, we normally collaborate with WISE or SEMTA or the Royal Academy.
Absolutely right. And, you know, they've done the groundwork, and it's that collaboration, and it's a beautiful marriage when you can kind of bring it all together. I'm so pleased to hear you mention Coventry, because that's my hometown, and I'm so proud of Coventry and the young people who are there, and the university is doing so very well. And it sounds like you're doing a lot to address. And I feel when you can meet a woman and ask her what she does for a living, she says, you know, I'm a pilot. There's no longer this sort of, oh, wow, you're so clever. You know, come on. So we've got a long way to go still, but it's happening more and more and more. And you're right, it has to happen at school level. So we've talked about the BAME community, thank you. We've talked about females. Let's move on to the LGBTQ plus community. What are you doing to make sure that they are also involved?
It's probably the most challenging area because I said that we collate data based on the Office of National Statistic headlines, which does include sexual orientation, religion, faith, race, etc. The one area which people are still most reticent to share information on is probably sexual orientation. I've also mentioned we're a global organisation. So within UK, I mean, increasingly the sexual orientation piece is almost a distraction And most people just get on with being great engineers. Employers are very engaging and open and supportive. And it is still quite clearly an issue in certain circumstances. But within UK, the structures are probably in place now to allow people to move forward. There's still discrimination there. There's still bigotry there. IC as an organisation has a whole raft of UK regions when it comes to pride marches, and the more overt support, IC will march with the pride banners with IC on it, just to say, as a professional institution, we are wholly supportive, and we are there to support any individual that wishes to make engineering a career. We also engage with all the employers, and the employers are increasingly impressive in terms of what they're able to deliver for their people. We also have a benevolent fund within ICE, which is there to provide training. So the unconscious bias training is just one aspect, but there's a whole raft of other training modules that one can undertake in order to make people more aware. There are places around the world, I mentioned we're in 156 countries, where sexual orientation is more of a significant problem. So although we collate the data, we also give the rather not say option for those individuals who are working internationally, where in some countries we operate, it's still a capital offence.
That's
so,
right.
You know, we need to be alive to that, and we need to say, you have to, if you choose to work in a country internationally, you have to abide by local laws. It doesn't mean to say that ICE agrees with those laws or condones or encourages it. And in every condition under the Engineer Code of Conduct, we would expect people to treat people fairly, you know, openly, supportively, and in no way to demonstrate any form of bigotry. So it's not an easy area to operate within internationally, because there are different rules and regulations throughout. ICE is a member of the International Ethics Standards Coalition. So in terms of, again, collaborating internationally, in terms of both ethics and standards, we are signatory. We were the 60th signatory. I think there's now 120. So we joined some time ago in order to try and make it clear where ICE's position is on it. But again, we are a professional society, a learned society, and the qualifying body. We're not a police force. So we can't force behaviours. We can only encourage behaviours. But I think I've been with IC now for 5 years, and I've not picked up any feedback from any members of the LGBTQ community within IC or otherwise, where I've had negative feedback that IC as an institution isn't providing the support that they require. So some people might quite rightly say it's trite marching around London or Glasgow or Edinburgh, Cardiff with a pride band, if that's all you're doing. But that's not all we're doing. We engage with employers, and we engage with individuals, and we provide the support that individuals need in terms of both mentoring and feedback. So one of the things I haven't mentioned is we're very fortunate in IC having a regional laydown, a regional structure. So we have a number of UK regions and a number of international regions. Within those regions, we have regional support teams, and those teams are constantly engaging on that level and promoting equality, diversity, and inclusion, again, at all levels.
It's just such a big area to cover, and I didn't want to leave out another community, because I remember doing an event last year with young people. There must have been about 100 in the audience, and we had a panel of people from the world of STEM, and they could ask them absolutely anything. And there was a young woman there who had dyspraxia, and she really wanted to work in some kind of field of engineering, or just to be part of that community. But she felt it wasn't for her, because all through school she'd been put into classes where she felt she was left, you know, and wasn't able to really express what she wanted to do in the future. And she just felt like she was just somebody that would never get heard. But the panelists gave her such strength and encouragement in their sort of answers. You know, she went away beaming. But, you know, we feel sometimes that when you see a disability, it is a disability because somebody's in a chair, or, you know, you see their physical side. There's the mental side of disability, isn't there?
Yeah.
That you don't see, or maybe people don't want to admit to. So again, I mean, you're talking about how challenging LGBTQ plus can be. how do you deal with looking after people also that have a disability of some kind that you cannot even see?
I think it's fair to say, I know I'm here to represent the Institution of Civil Engineers in this particular sort of afternoon discussion. I think it's fair to say that all the PIs I have engaged with, professional engineering institutions that I've engaged with, are extraordinarily receptive to the needs of individuals. So it's not just an ICE thing. I think most of the professional bodies do. It's got many labels. So, you know, neurodiversity, special learning difficulties, specific learning difficulties. There's a whole raft of them, but of terms that are applied to it. But fundamentally, most professional bodies, including ICE, start from the premise that we want everybody who is technically competent and able to be a civil engineer to come into the institution. Yes, there's a standard through professional review. That's the standard we would expect everybody to achieve. And it's an internationally recognized standard, so it can't be changed. The standard is the standard. But in terms of making the route to passing that standard as straightforward, as open, and as supportive as possible, we train all the people on that journey. So the UK regions, as I spoke about, we have people called Membership Development Officers, MDOs. They're out there engaging with individuals and with employers to try and get that cohort, whoever they might be, from the time they join a company up to some form of professional review. Those MDOs are trained on transgender issues. That's not an SPLD, but it's, you know, as an issue. They're trained to spot any form of autism, no matter how severe it is. They'll be able to spot that. Dyspraxia, you know, dyslexia, the sorts of challenge that people have, agoraphobia. If an individual, for example, is going to be coming forward for some form of professional review and struggles in groups or in broader audiences, we will do those professional reviews, if needs be, at the individual's office. We will travel to the office in order to facilitate that professional review, and have done many, many times. We also train up the reviewer cohort itself. So there's an induction program where they are taught to identify specific learning difficulties that they may encounter at a professional review. And there are a whole raft of modules that those reviewers will undertake to prepare them for whatever may eventuate in terms of people coming forward for a review. So something like dyspraxia, where to an untrained eye, it might appear that somebody's posture is bad, or, you know, they're being slovenly, or they're not making good eye contact or otherwise. The reviewer will be trained to be able to spot that and to encourage the individual to come forward. So even the choice of their language. So instead of using sort of general language like, you know, paint a picture, or literal language, where somebody with dyspraxia might struggle with that terminology and not understand what you mean by paint a picture. Specific activity, produce a diagram here which represents X, Y, or Z, and lead them through the process. So the standard doesn't change, but facilitating the individual and recognizing that there will be challenges that may not exist elsewhere, I think, is a very important part to being inclusive. Now, of course, there's a whole raft of positives that come with people with specific learning difficulties. They might have extraordinary memory recall. They might be brilliant with figures, numbers, or they may even be intuitive in terms of spotting second and third order issues. And those are all benefits that the profession will gain by ensuring that they get through the various hurdles in terms of professional qualification. But we do provide training, and I know others do, but we've made a real effort to ensure that everybody who engages with an individual, with a potential engineer anywhere on that journey, is equipped to recognize the needs that those individuals have and to facilitate that support. So there's much more to be done, but I know that in 2017, we had a membership survey. We sent a survey out to 95,000 members. There was a significant response, so it was statistically relevant. And the criticism that was made back in 2017 was that we weren't doing enough in the sort of the learning difficulty space, and that people were coming for interview thinking, right down to hearing loops for the hard of hearing, or, you know, the dyspraxic or the dyslexic. In the last 3 years, we have made, I think, fairly significant progress. So in 2019, a lot of the feedback was very positive, that they did feel that special efforts were being made, and they did feel included in the process.
It seems to me that you are listening to your feedback and you're moving on, and we've just got a bit of time just to talk about any other things that make you stand out from other organizations, those things that make you different.
Well, I think the regional network is unique. I mean, it's a USP in as much as to say to somebody, once you leave your apprenticeship or once you leave university and join an employer, that's not the end of the journey. That's the beginning of it. It sounds, again, an easy throwaway line. It's very, very reassuring that from the time you engage with an individual at school to the time they become a fellow in their sort of, mid 40s perhaps, that journey is a continuum, and throughout that journey there's been a regional support team or members of the institution constantly engaged. So I think, hand on heart, I can turn around and say, although different institutions have different regions around UK, very few of them have regional support teams and membership development officers who are constantly proactively engaged with individuals, spotting problems and challenges and resolving those challenges en route. I don't think, any civil engineer will tell you they are unique, and they are special because, of course, they're fiercely proud of having chosen civil engineering. But it's interesting, within the equality, diversity and inclusion space, civil engineering is almost by definition both diverse and inclusive, because the role of the civil engineer is to create societies, communities, infrastructure, urban areas. And of course, by designing and building those, we physically design and build loneliness out of cities and make those cities inclusive. So if you're doing a new reconstruction, either on a brownfield site or a new site, quite often now, the civil engineer will accept the fact that there's maybe aged community. I mean, we don't talk about elderly people, but they are a very large cohort who have specific needs. Well, when that individual needs to move across, possibly to get medicine or pharmacy, part of the design now is to make sure that individual goes through somewhere within that community which forces social interaction. So they're not constantly lonely, not seeing anybody, but actually that journey that takes them to the pharmacy takes them to some social gathering, some form of social event, or some form of welfare support that allows them to engage with that community in a way they might not have done before.
Thank you so much. I mean, we're coming towards the end of the interview, and a couple of questions did come through, but I kind of weaved them into what we were talking about. It was about disability and neurodiverse sort of topics, so we covered that. So that was Jenny McClacken, thank you, McClacken even. So thank you so much. Inclusive by design, Jenny has popped up. So I hope we've covered that too for you also, Jenny. If you have a specific question, please put it forward so I can ask Sean before he goes, because my final question was going to be, what would it mean for the ICE to win this award?
I said right at the outset that there's two of us within ICE who, on our job descriptions, says you will engage in the EDI space, and that's a very limited resource. I think it's fair to say success in whatever form has 1,000 fathers, failure none. So in terms of what winning would allow, it would catch the eye. So we rely very heavily on employers actually doing the right thing, and they've got incredible teams, incredible resource, and they are doing the right thing. It would be interesting if IC's name were associated with having success in this space, because we do invest an extraordinary amount of effort into trying to make the profession a better, more diverse and inclusive place. And I think CEOs would recognize it. The hierarchy within ICE, the trustee and the council board, will reinforce success. And if we're seen to be successful in an area, you will reinforce that area of success. So in terms of the personal piece, clearly there'd be an element of pride associated with ICE winning any award. It would be a just reward for Andrew Stanley, who invested his life in this space. But more importantly, I think it would reinforce and marshal resource beyond what ICE is able to marshal and provide, and it would get the sector. It would get the construction sector recognise the importance of equality, diversity and inclusion, and reinforcing that success. So it would be important in a whole raft of different ways.
Absolutely fantastic, Sean. You've really given us the length and breadth of the ICE. I'm coming away with just so much more information about what you do and how you are working on those key points to include your 95,000 membership and beyond. So thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure. Thank you so much, Fionn.
Wonderful.
Okay.
And thank you to everybody who has been watching today. I hope you got as much out of it as I did. Of course, we look forward to another webinar with our nominees very, very soon. And remember, as soon as you see these come out on our website, do share so that others also get the benefit. And so for now, have a really great day. Stay safe. Look after yourselves.